Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening/watching a new episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And with me today is our special guest, Benjamin Stimpson. It is good to see you.
Hello, thank you, Jordan. Thank you for having me on.
Oh yes, it's quite good. So before we get into the movie you picked, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Of course. So I'm originally from the UK. People can probably hear that in my accent.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lived in Canada for the past 30 years, so I'm up near
Mm.
Toronto. I'm a psychotherapist slash counselor, and the majority of my work is around narrative therapy and transpersonal and Jungian archetypal psychology.
Mm.
So I find that I use a lot of narrative work in working with clients directly. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, this particular movie that I often bring up.
Okay. So the movie that he has picked for today's episode is a film that I had never heard of, but it's my first time watching it. Shirley Valentine from 1989, directed by Lewis Gilbert, starring
Mhm.
Pauline Collins, Tom Conti, and I always forget the actor's name, but he is best known to contemporary fans as the captain of the Titanic in the
Mhm.
film of the same name. So he's in the
That's
film as
cool.
well.
Yeah.
Why did you pick this film?
Well, so when you posted on that Facebook group, you were looking for guests. I thought, oh, this would be a wonderful opportunity to not only talk this film up, but also talk about how I use this film. So this
Mm,
film in particular, I often like to use with my UK clients. So although
mm,
I trained in Canada, the majority of my clients are in the UK. I'm actually moving back over there.
mm,
And this particular one in 1989, it's within my lifetime. So I
mm-hmm,
remember it when I was very young. We
mm,
used to watch it on television when I was a child.
mm,
And it's also from the area generally that I'm from in England, Wales.
mm,
So my parents are from about an hour due east from where this is set, which is Liverpool. And it was a real big kind of cultural phenomenon because it was so relatable to a particular generation. And I think that there's elements in it that are relatable regardless of who we are.
mm,
And so I often will bring it up with some of my kind of older clients who remember seeing it, people
mm.
who perhaps are entering into the kind of midlife phase of their life, and might be thinking back about who they were when they were younger, what they want in their life, and things like that. So I love it. I mean, there's so many iconic British actors in it too.
Mm,
It's a cultural phenomenon over there. Even if
mm,
people haven't watched it, and we're now getting it's a little older. It's 30 years old,
mm-hmm.
more than 30 years old. It's
Yes.
something that maybe younger people haven't seen, but people generally of my age, 30s to 40s to 50s, will definitely have seen it and may have remembered it. So that's why I chose it. I'd love to talk more.
Yes, it is a great film. I watched it all the way through, and it is a pretty much, as I saw it, it's like from a woman's perspective. It's about her life story, about when she was very rebellious as a young child, and when she got into adulthood, she was with the love of her life, and then afterwards, the marriage didn't work out, and she wanted something more than just, being a domesticated housewife and just being a mother to her two children, and she has a best friend, and it's very much an interesting comedy drama romantic type of film that I enjoyed. And I also loved that it's similar to a film that the director had filmed earlier called Alfie with Michael Caine, in which he used the same type of narrative of the main protagonist talking directly to the audience. So I thought that was very interesting as I watched this picture, because this is, I wouldn't say it's the female version of Alfie, but it's very similar in the terms of how she directs to the audience, and it's all from her perspective, which I thought I really liked as I watched this film.
This is a really interesting kind of cultural piece here.
Mm-hmm.
British television, British media for a very long time was really dominated by actors who their origins were on the stage. So
Mm-hmm.
in the stage, you of course have the audience live in front of you. You've got that fourth wall, and oftentimes, the action is taking place, and the fourth wall is not broken. What I really loved about this particular movie was it was actually based on a stage play,
Mm-hmm.
and the stage play routinely broke the fourth wall as a form of of narrative
Mm-hmm.
and dialogue, and the actors, who was also Pauline was also the one who did the stage play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because of her loneliness, because of, being at home. This was back in the days where, most women would stay at home, they weren't working, particularly women of a certain age. They
Mm-hmm.
were just not used to having a career of their own.
Mm-hmm.
So what they would do, they would stay home and they would housekeep, and they would do, and that loneliness would set in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this breaking of the fourth wall was her literally talking to the wall because she was lonely and narrating her life. So we take in that form of the fourth wall, that she's literally speaking to us as the audience.
Mm.
And what I love is that later in the movie, when she goes to Greece to finally just get away from everything, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a scene where she's on the beach in Greece, which is culturally very similar to if somebody in the States were to go to Cancun or to go to
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. That's a similar sort of niche, right?
Yeah.
She just, gives up and just goes and has her holiday. And she's
Yeah.
on the beach, and she says to the camera, "Oi, over here." Yeah, over here. And she says, I want to introduce this to somebody. This is Rock. I'm talking to Rock now.
Yeah.
But Rock can't understand me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Rock doesn't understand what I'm saying because he's a Greek Rock. I love, so funny, right?
It
Um,
is. I found it particularly funny too as I watched this film because not only do I find it enjoyable to watch, but as you mentioned before, it is relatable. It is about loneliness. It is about getting away from the domesticated life. It is about getting away from boredom and the ennui. But that's what I loved about this picture. And I would say there was one particular quote in which she said, I want to go travel, but there is a reason why I can't do it. It's just because I can't, because I don't know what's going to happen. So I thought this was repeated later in near the end of the film when the husband, who remains in the UK, was asked by his son that it's not that he doesn't want to travel, it's just that he doesn't want to do it and that
yeah.
he's bored, which I thought it speaks to the audience because that's I think what's so relatable about that line as I heard it.
I think that's very relatable to a lot of people, particularly people who are, again, entering that middle part of their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're so busy with all of the humdrum, just doing, and I think that's relatable to nowadays. I mean, people are working more than they're living nowadays, just because
Yeah.
everything's so expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can become really a place of losing oneself, losing direction in oneself. We have enough life experience now to, really wonder, is this really what I wanted for my life? Is this really
Mm-hmm.
what I wanted my life to be? And that wonderful part about the movie and why it's so relatable, I think, is throughout we get these kind of reminiscences, these flashbacks
Mm-hmm.
to when she was younger.
Yes.
And I think I think that really speaks to us because, I mean, I'm 30, almost 38 now.
Mm-hmm.
It's 20 years ago. There are teenagers who were running around that weren't even born when I was in high school, right? And I think, I do wonder, like, is this the life I'm leading? Is this the life I want to live? And I got into that kind of frame of mind,
Yeah.
until I realized that every day is life, right? I
Yeah.
think that's really the whole point of the movie, is that any day we can make a decision that will change our life. We don't have to stay stuck in place. And I find when working with clients, that's often where they're at. They're coming because they feel stuck in place, and they're working with that narrative of, I can't change my life. I don't have power. I feel regret that I didn't do this. What if life was different? Well, what if
Mm.
life was different?
Yeah.
Right.
And now a message from Jordan Ramirez for Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez.
I want to take a break from this episode to thank my listeners/viewers who watch the videos on my YouTube channel and listen to each new episode on Spotify. While this show is a labor of love and passion that isn't about the movies that I like, this is also a show that is about the films that you like. Have a film that you want to recommend to the podcast? make sure to recommend it in the comments section on YouTube and on Spotify, and you will receive a shout out in a future episode. Want to be a guest on the podcast? Click on the sign up form link in the episode description for further details. If you like this episode or my previous episodes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more interviews in the near future. The goal for this channel is to reach up to 100 subscribers both on YouTube and on Spotify. It's just that easy. And now, back to our regularly scheduled episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that covers our third topic that we were going to discuss, connections, because we've covered so much about the relatability in this film, and we've covered about the main protagonist of the film. You mentioned in the guest form sheet that you also are a huge fan. You use fandom and movies when it is related to your work. So do you have other examples of like other movies or television programs that you enjoy that maybe you could use as an example for like part of what you're working on so that maybe the audience can understand?
Absolutely. All of them. This is the cool thing. All of them. I'm sure that when you're speaking to guests about their favorite movies, a lot of their own life comes up, right? Because of that relatability. There's certain movies and certain TV shows that have defined generations. Star Wars is a big one, right? How many people really connect with Star Wars or Star Trek because of the core values? And what often happens, and this is why I love narrative therapy so much. How I started working in psychotherapy to begin with was actually through spirituality, and it was through the hero's journey. So I was working with a group that was working with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. The hero's journey, for those who may not know, I'm sure many of your listeners will know what it is already, but it's that quintessential archetypal journey of the hero, being the call to action, going through the shadow, the call to adventure, going and fighting some external source, and then coming back having lost and gained and become something different, that transformative journey, right?
Yeah.
That is archetypal because the movie industry and many of the TV shows that have been created in the past 40 years have been so heavily kind of influenced by that and by that psychology. So, when I think of my own life, I think of like Harry Potter is one that really affected my life. It came out around the same time that I moved to Canada. I felt different. I was like a little British kid, glasses, little scar on my forehead, English accent, right? Who do you think I was going to be called, right? So that was a character in a TV show, that a movie series that really resonated. Avatar: The Last Airbender. How many people in their 30s and early 40s really resonated with Avatar: The Last Airbender because we were of a certain age? And even now, I mean, people are discovering it now. That's the cool thing with like Netflix and TV show and Amazon and whatnot. Like all these old TV shows and movies from years ago are being discovered by the kids now, by the teenagers and early 20-somethings now, and they're finding something in these, right? A more recent example is Steven Universe.
Oh yes. Which was on Cartoon Network, and then it was moved to X, and I don't want to get into that matter, but so you mentioned Steven Universe, Harry Potter, Avatar: The Last Airbender. These were shows that I imagine we're almost like in the same age group that came out when these shows or these movies were out in theaters or on television. And I do resonate with some of the shows that I did watch, and shows that may not feel like it's part of the mainstream, but I feel like I want to reconnect to some of those shows. I mean, I'm huge into like detective shows, and I'm huge into like animation from not just in the United States, but from abroad. I'm a huge like anime fan. But I loved how I like this conversation that we're having, because I liked connecting fandom from not just movies, but also TV shows that I enjoy, maybe you enjoy as well, and maybe our listeners enjoy, that they can relate to. So it is a great opportunity to discuss this topic.
Absolutely. Essentially what it comes down to, right, is representation.
Mm-hmm.
Something that, I mean, I've seen this in my own life, but as a therapist, as a professional in this, I see this all the time. We are very good at lying to ourselves when it comes to our trauma, when it comes to our experiences, when it comes to who we are. We come into a world, we're socialized with all sorts of scripts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to fit in. And for the vast majority of people, we don't fit in. You know, I'm neurodiverse. I have a neurological condition that it puts me onto the spectrum, and part of that is a mismatch with what's normal, right? So
Yeah.
growing up, to have representation of that, even if it wasn't explicitly stated, was really important. It was somebody that I could look to, a character that I could look to, right? I could be included in the world. A lot of, you know, queer people, for example, marginalized people in general, that representation is really important. And so what that allows us is a proxy for us to work out our own stuff, because we are very good, our human minds in general, regardless of kind of neurodiversity or neurotypicality, we're very good at pushing down and not looking at things, because part of that cognitive dissonance of just fitting in or wanting to fit in. So with characters, what we often do is we often relate to characters, and through those characters we can explore ourselves. This extends into other things like LARPing, for example, live action role play. If you talk to a lot of people who LARP and ask them, tell us about your first character when you first started LARPing, they will say that that character was entirely just them, right? Eventually, what happened is they started to explore and expand and experiment, and the other characters that came after those characters usually are things or aspects of self that they want to become, or that they've never felt like they could, could put out there or be in their regular life. So this is a safe space for them to explore those things and integrate it. It's the exact same thing with movies and characters from TV shows and movies and whatnot. And so that's why I think Steven Universe is so important for this past generation, is that it has so many different forms of representation, the storylines within it, in the same way that Shirley Valentine had that representation. The storylines in that really resonated with people's experiences and allowed them to feel, oh, okay, it's not just me. I can change this narrative that I've been forced on or have been living with, and I'm able to live a different life.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the power of literature in general.
Yeah, very much so, because my sister and I believe my brother, they're huge fans of the show when it first aired, as well as shows like, oh my gosh, I might not remember this, Adventure Time, also from that same period, which had, I don't know if it had similar themes and elements from that show, but Steven Universe, Adventure Time, all those shows that came out in the past decade and early 2020s decade, they're very much representing people who are, as you mentioned, marginalized, or the queer community, or any of those communities in general. Because when I was growing up, I never talked about this before, but when I was growing up, almost all the shows that I used to watch were based on children's literature, and almost all of them, even though I'm from the United States, I found out later that some of them were made in Canada. So it's pretty amazing that I grew up watching Canadian animated cartoons and American animated cartoons as a child, and then as I grow up, I started to have remembrances of those programs that I used to watch, like Winnie the Pooh, Thomas the Tank Engine, all those shows I used to watch, because that was part of what I watched growing up. And now, as I'm older, I'm more watching like anime shows and shows that I feel that I watch feel very resonant to me, or I just like the style of humor, or there are characters in the show that I feel are entirely relatable to how I feel. So I do experience it as I get older, and I start to I wouldn't say question my identity, but also question what I am doing in my role of society.
This is the thing, right? And as we get older, our relationships tend to shift with some of these characters. You know, that's the interesting and really kind of unique thing, is that, these characters are very timeless in many ways because they do grow with us, right? We relate to Thomas the Tank Engine when we're young, right?
Yes.
In a way. But when we get older, some people start to relate to Gordon or the Fat Controller, right? I
Yeah.
can't say that nowadays, but
No.
it changes, right?
Yeah.
Also like how we take in some of these, right? When you were
Mm.
younger and watching these Canadian TV shows,
Mm-hmm.
particularly living in the States, you were surrounded by that United States cultural zone. There may
Yeah.
have been elements of those TV shows that were just not coming into your mind
Yeah.
or being recognized by you because of that strict United States culture. And every
Mm.
country is like that. When
Mm-hmm.
we get older and we start to learn more about the world, we start to pick up on different things. So I'm sure watching some of them now, or watching Japanese anime, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you pick up on cultural details that really challenge these core details. I know a lot of kids who love, or individuals who love, like BoJack Horseman
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's a really popular one right now, right?
Yes, I watched that show on Netflix, and it's a pretty interesting show because when I see that show, it's like animal cult, it's anthropomorphizing uh the satire of Hollywood, but as celebrities. And there's another one that I think is very similar, Tuca and Birdie, also on Netflix, which I also adore. I always consider Tuca and Birdie in my mindset as the successor to Rocco's Modern Life, because to me they're very
Mm.
similar. They're very similar, and they have like satirical ideas, but it's the difference in perspective. So when I see anthropomorphizing in animation or maybe in live action shows, it's almost like I can feel like I want to be part of that world. I want to be part of,
Yeah.
what is it like to not be human, but be an anthropomorphic character, something that I always enjoy.
This is the thing. This is why that particular tradition right there has gone on for centuries. Apart from my work as a therapist, I'm also a folklorist. Something that I'm really interested in is the continuation of stories over like 500, 600 years. One
Mm-hmm.
of the recurring things throughout world literature, and this is universal, is that anthropomorphic and anthropomorphizing of
Mm-hmm.
animals. And that's the main distinction between parables and fables, as fables always have anthropomorphized animals. And part of that is psychological. It is easier for us and safer for us to relate to a story about animals than it is humans, because
Mm-hmm.
then we can put anything we want onto those animals. They
Mm-hmm.
become safe spaces, right?
Yeah.
I remember. Do you remember Animorphs back in the day?
Yes, I
Mhm.
remembered the books, and they had a television series in the late 90s. So yes, I do remember them.
Yeah. So this idea of shapeshifting and changing. I was reading an interview by K.A. Applegate, who was the writer
Mm.
and fabulous individual, fabulous writer. And she was saying how, coming up with the idea of teenagers being able to like change and transform into animals and aliens and whatever else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It created that element of, danger and help the plot go along. But she said she was very what's the word? Um,
Driven or
she was it's like right on the tip of my tongue. Anyways, she was very specific in putting into those stories how the characters then were thinking, what was being in those new bodies like. There
mm.
was one scene where some of them were dolphins, and another one, I think Tobias was a whale shark or like a
Okay.
shark. And
Okay.
so being in those bodies and experiencing that life, even though they were mentally human,
Mm-hmm.
um, while knowing that there's also a shark right behind you and
Yes.
feeling those fears and all that. She was very specific specifically for that age range,
Mm.
what it was like to then, be a different person than who you were. And I know a lot of people who just reading that in the same way that like Harry Potter or like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or anything magical really impacted their ability to be like, okay, what else could my life be, right? To
Mm.
imagine themselves differently. And I think that's really important throughout life. We
Mm-hmm.
need to stay in that moment of, life being a possibility, even as opposed to a directed path.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we have discussed about that, I don't know if we'll have time to discuss. No, we might have time to discuss a little bit about your podcast. So Essence with Ben
Mhm.
Stimpson. So could you tell us a little bit about what the podcast details and where people can find it?
Yeah, for sure. So they can find it on YouTube. They can also go to my website, benstimpson.com, and there's a little tab on there. The podcast was really my way of networking and connecting in with the writers who were writing in my niche. So apart from my therapy work, kind of including my folkloric work, I'm an author, so I've got several books out or coming out, and this was a way that I could connect in with other authors within that metaphysical, within that witchcraft and magic niche. And talk about kind of their experience writing, what it was like for them to connect with their work, and what their ideas were, kind of similar to what we kind of the conversation we just had.
Oh yeah.
And it was wonderful. I'm continuing it. I put it on backlog because I've been working on some other projects. But if people want to learn about kind of some of the pagan or neo-pagan authors out there, they can go to that. And I've got many of the major writers on there who are wonderful people and really cool conversations. So
Yes.
benstimpson.com.
Oh yes, thank you so much. Now that we have discussed a little bit about the Essence with Ben Stimpson podcast, I want to discuss a little bit about this is a little bit outside of Shirley Valentine, but this is you have you ever seen the film Wolfwalkers, the film from Cartoon Saloon from Ireland?
No, I haven't seen that. No.
Oh, okay. So in relation to what you were discussing about in your podcast, I was a huge fan of the Cartoon Saloon films, beginning with the Book of Kells, and then the middle film.
Oh, yes, I know
Yes, the
this.
Book of
Mhm.
Kells, then the Song of the Sea, and finally Wolfwalkers, which is their latest film. And I became fascinated with the movie because it was sort of my introduction into Irish history and to culture and mythology. So I thought I wanted to discuss if you've heard of this film because I thought it in relation to your podcast Essence with Ben Stimpson, that maybe this would be an interesting film. It's all about the differences between like the Irish people, the native Irish people who were living in Ireland at the time versus
Mhm.
the English colonists who were basically colonizing this area. And it's a pretty interesting story dating the film is taking place I think in the 16th or 17th century. I
Mhm.
might not be sure,
Makes sense.
but it's a really wonderfully presented animated movie. It's not like a film based on historical document or anything, but it is but as I watch the film, it sort of reflects like the present situation that we are in now with the idea of using these sort of like I wouldn't say witch hunts that they depicted in the picture, but like
Mhm.
these ideas of taming wildlife as the
Mhm.
way that, the church that the Lord Protector in the movie, Oliver Cromwell, as he was depicted in the film, is trying to make things right because he's part of the organized religion, and it's all about, sort of that thing. But that's what I liked about this movie in general, because it's all about, just embracing who you are, just
Mhm.
understanding about cultures that maybe people are not aware of, and also that it's a fun, loving movie. And as Mark Kermode, I listened to some of his podcast. He said it's a film that has, I think he called it like it's a heartwarming film that has teeth in it or something like that.
I can
But
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, but it is a wonderful film, and I thought I would share it because it's a film that I thought I enjoyed, and I enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. I have seen the Book of Kells. I loved the Book of Kells.
Mm,
I'll have to watch this movie. To make a point on that, I think that's what he said about that it would have teeth.
yeah.
Europe is a very strange place. Well, it's not a strange place. It's a place where there's a long memory for stuff, right?
Hmm.
And people's identities now are very much intermingled with stuff that happened 400, 500, 600 years ago.
Yeah.
Part of my folkloric work is to track stories as they evolve over time in the written record. And it's
Hmm.
really interesting when you get a chance to see how narratives shift and change, and how the community uses folklore as opposed to the story and literature as a way of cementing identity and cultural identity. You know, the issues of Ireland particularly is that it was the staging ground for what eventually would happen in North America with indigenous people, right? The way that the English government particularly came in and colonized Ireland and forced the Irish to accept Protestantism as opposed to Catholicism was something that, again, happened in North America and Australia and other parts of the world during that colonialism period. And they weren't the only ones. The English weren't the only ones. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the Germans, the French, many European powers were involved in those. But I think that, again, what we're seeing now, the issues that we're seeing now in that particular country, right, Northern Ireland, is again really connected back, and that piece about that question of who do we want to be is asked again and again and again. And, you know, people of a certain generation, they get stuck in a certain way. And I'm finding that even with myself. I think most people who are kind of in their middle ages, they tend to get stuck. And on a cultural level, that happens, right? So you have an older generation that are still stuck within these old narratives of Protestant versus Catholic, unionist versus republicanism, right? And the younger generations are either having to take that up or challenge it. And nowadays we're in a position where a lot of people in Northern Ireland, younger people in Northern Ireland, are not interested in taking that up again and not interested in identifying based on those old lines. So I think it really does tie into what we're talking about with Shirley Valentine and any of these, right? It's that question of who do we want to be and who do we want to be going forward, because we don't have to stick with the groove that, you know, we're handed in the past, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing that after this discussion, it's something that I always wanted to discuss. But I do like that in Shirley Valentine, the movie that we discussed earlier, and I kind of knew it was a stage play because it had the mention that she won, I think it was like a Tony Award for the stage play when it does it have a history of when the play first opened and when it first or when it closed?
I believe that the play was in the mid 1980s, so 1985. I'd have to check, but it was performed in Liverpool and then ended up being performed in London. And for a long time it was being performed. And I'm pretty sure that she continued to perform it even after the movie came out. Let me just see here. West End for the here we go. Music, please. Yeah, it doesn't say how long, so I have the screen up here, but it is play of the same name. Here we go. Let's just find out here. And it's still continuing even now, like with different actors.
Oh wow.
Pauline Collins was really the main person, right? Most of the other actors who are in that role now continue to try to emulate her. And she's done things ever since, like she's been involved in all sorts of other projects. But I would say that this really is the defining, part of her career. This is the defining character. And again, I think it says something that it's continuing to be made and continuing to be watched. Like it's on television most Christmases over in the UK.
Oh wow.
Just because it's one of those feel-good movies.
It is. It is a feel-good movie, and I pretty much enjoy it because of it doesn't have to be fictive. It doesn't have to be like a fantasy film or a science fiction movie. It's a movie about her life, and it's a movie that is entirely relatable, as we mentioned earlier. And it is a film that that is something that I could say is something I enjoy because it's a woman's story. It's a story about a woman who is in her middle age and a woman who wants to get out of her, domesticated life. So before we end the show, do we have any short closing do you have like a short closing argument and a plug-in before we wrap up?
Not about the movie, because I think it's fabulous and I don't want to argue about it. But what I would say is that what we've talked about today, people can do with all of the movies that they love in their lives, right? When you're watching a movie, you can use it as a therapy session. You can watch it and be like, okay, who am I connecting with here? Why am I connecting with this character? What is it about this character that I see myself in, right? And you can also do it with the opposite. What is this character that I really hate? This character that's, coming up and bringing stuff up for me. What is it about them that I don't like? What is it I'm rejecting? Right? It's it's awkward because once you start to see movies that way, you can't unsee them. But I think that that eventually, you'll gain a good sense of self through them, and you engage with literature and movies and TV shows in a different way. There are some movies I think that you'll just switch off and it'll be like, yeah, this is just entertainment. But for those that really grip us, it's something that I think people will really like. I'm not entirely sure if certain types of movies, like say pornography, you're going to get that. Like Debbie Does Dallas, I don't think there's anything in there, but
No.
but other types of literature, certainly. So that's what I would say is, engage with deeper. You can do it with music too. Music lyrics, deep listening in music is the same as deep watching, and you come to appreciate the artistry of some of these things when you engage that way. So that's what I would say.
Okay. So where can people find you before we wrap up? Like on where can people find you, like on social media or on your website?
Definitely. So so I have two websites. benstimpson.com is my main website. I also have a secondary website for my therapy stuff, and I talk a lot more about my work with fandom and how to relate with television shows, movies, and literature on there. And that's benstimpsoncounseling.co.uk. So that's all on my main website, though.
And you are and your show is available on YouTube and also on. Did you mention like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or where? Okay.
Yeah, so it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, any of those interrelated BuzzPod and whatnot and all that. So
yeah, absolutely. And you're available on Facebook, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Yes, so those are my main primary social medias. So
okay, thank you so much, Ben. And it was a great and wonderful conversation that we had. And this is Jordan Ramirez signing off. And until then, I'll see you at the movies. And Ben, thanks again for coming on the show, and hope to see you again in the future.
I hope so too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Okay, so long.